a thumbs up if you guys can see my screen. Thank you. Thank you. Alrighty, Leah, I've got that. Alrighty, guys. So we are in. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for your thumbs up. So today is the 19th. There's a few announcements. So you have your. Let me pull up my syllabus. Okay. Again, making the transition. So your Typhoid Mary, that film reflection that is due on today. We're going to go over health disparities and cultural competency and why it is an essential skill for health science professionals. I'm going to also your review terms are going to be due for next week. There's no review terms now. This is a start of for the class 10, 11, and 12. So your next homework review terms will be due next week. Your cultural awareness questionnaire reflection is also due next week. And next week is the due date for that city training. So if you completed that city training, I believe it is somewhere maybe it is in the course materials, maybe for class number 6. Some of you have completed it. Whatever overall score you receive on that city training, that will convert to extra credit points that will go to exam number 1. So you have a few things that are due on the 26th, including your final paper. So your title of your paper, please, you can refer to the syllabus. It should be entitled The Social Determinants of Health in blank, and that is your community, whatever community you have done your assignments on, typically your community. So it can be in Flushing, it can be, I know it's someone for Queens Village, I want to say. So the title should be The Social Determinants of Health in and your name of your community. There are 2 videos also on Blackboard that you can view: Implicit Bias in Healthcare and also Culturally Competent Healthcare. They're short videos. I've already said the review terms, the homework review terms, and the cultural awareness questionnaire reflection is also due. Okay, next slide. Okay, so it's working. All right. So I believe in our next class on the 26th, we're going to talk about insurance systems, and this is just like a precursor to how the different healthcare systems that we have in different countries. We'll go over the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, etc. But it's important that we understand the types of healthcare that is provided to individuals within the United States. It gives you a better frame of reference for when we go over the healthcare systems. And so we have 3 types of healthcare that are provided to individuals in the United States. The first type of healthcare is primary care. And so primary care is the first contact any provider has with a patient. Primary care providers handle the greatest number of patients. Approximately only 1/3 of the physicians in the United States practice primary care. And primary care, as we've seen over the years, is increasingly being handled by nurse practitioners or physician assistants. Primary care is also considered the foundation of a healthcare system. And so, as I said, this provides you with a frame of reference for when we go over the different types of healthcare systems. When it comes to medical treatment within the communities, the primary care provider is the central point of care, and that provider informs or is involved in all other types of care. So you may have a primary care physician. That primary care physician will then provide a referral for you to see another physician, another specialty physician. Secondary care is the second type of healthcare, and so with this type of healthcare, it involves specialty care. So these may be physicians that work on specific body organs or systems. So you may have a cardiologist or ophthalmologist, and those would be considered your secondary care. Your third type of healthcare is your tertiary care. And these are what we consider subspecialties. So if you ever heard of like trauma care units, burn units, NICU or ICU units, that is those type of subspecialties are considered tertiary care. Why my cursor is not working? Okay, so just gave you the three types or the three levels of healthcare that we have. And along with that is the 6 C's, the goals and realities of primary care. And so when we go over the United States healthcare system, we will talk about some of the challenges and the limitations our healthcare system provides to individuals of the United States. And so the first C is contact. And so the goal of a primary care physician, as I mentioned, is having that first point of contact with the individual, the patient. And so the point of first contact with the healthcare system is considered the entry point. Patients enter the healthcare system through many disconnected points. It can be through emergency rooms. We see an increase or uptick in urgent care centers. So they can, that entry point can be an urgent care center. It can be, as I mentioned, your primary care provider or specialist or your non-traditional practitioners. The second C of primary care is comprehensive. Primary care intends to be able to diagnose and treat a great majority of problems. So when you think about going to an urgent care center as opposed to an emergency room, we're seeing with this particular C that there is a rapid increase in possible treatments and high volume practices that increases the proportion of patient problems that are referred to specialists. So, you know, your primary care providers oftentimes are inundated with their routine patients or maybe new patients. And so your urgent care centers that have popped up, I would say more than 50% pre-pandemic, because we've seen the increase in of urgent care centers, that this particular C, the comprehensive, you have urgent care centers that are able to diagnose and treat a majority of problems that the healthcare provider could sort of address, or your emergency room. So you can go to urgent care center and you can get, or now you can get your COVID test, you can get x-rays at an urgent care center. You can have some laboratory exams provided through your urgent care center. The next C is coordinated. And so primary care intends to be the focal point for diagnosis and treatment, with coordination through referral to specialists for consultation and feedback. What we're starting to see with primary care is that patients increasingly are required or encouraged to change their physicians or their providers for insurance purposes. So you may have a primary care physician, and your insurance company may want you to identify who that person is for insurance purposes. There are some insurance companies that you must list your primary care physician. You have some insurance companies that may not accept the primary care physician may not be in network with your insurance company, and so they may not accept their bills. And so oftentimes, depending on your insurance company, individuals will have to seek out a new primary care physician. The fourth C is continuity. So primary care providers, they do hold together the components of the system, and the patient is followed over many years. And this is seen through the provision of continuous care. So you, as I mentioned, you may have a primary care physician that you've seen for a very, very long time. However, we're starting to see increased numbers in patients being required to change their physicians or encouraged to change their physicians. If they don't change their physicians and they're out of network, then they will be told that they may have a really high copay. The next C is caring. And so One of the goals of primary care is to provide individualized care based on individual relationships. Primary care is increasingly becoming an administrative entity without a long-term individual relationship. So because of the high cost of malpractice insurance and the conglomerate mergers of doctors' offices, practices under the umbrella of large hospitals, you're seeing that it is all administrative. So you may have seen your particular primary care physician for many years. However, your primary care physician decided to join and come into network with, let's say, NYU. So NYU have massive, group practices, a lot of them. You may not continue. You may not have the individual access that you had with your primary care physician when they had their own primary practice or their private practice. And so we're seeing that a lot of it involves the administrative portion of it. You may see whoever is available, if that is the design of the practice now. And so the reality is that individuals are losing that individualized care and that individualized relationship that you had previously with your primary care physician. The last C is community. So primary care is designed to connect the individual patient with community resources and community requirements, such as notifying patients of the required examinations that they must take. And so maybe every year for women to have a breast cancer, mammography exam. It may, primary care may be responsible for reporting diseases and also vaccinations. The relationship between health professionals and public health is at times very contentious because, again, the reality is many organizations are expected to do more with less. We've seen the takeover and, like I said, the conglomerate mergers of insurance companies, and the realities are that health insurance is extremely important. And so not everyone has that access to insurance, and the debate goes, and I think next week I'll talk about that with the Patient Care Act, the Affordable Care Act, and the realities of that. And so this relationship that we see between health professionals and public health, and the role of public health in communities is there's some friction, and that times very contentious. So as I mentioned, not every individual will have access to health care. Not every individual has access to quality health care. And so it's important that we have an understanding of health disparities and what they are and how they are defined. And so there are a variety of definitions of health disparities that have been put forward. Some of the definitions of health disparities have been defined by various government agencies. And so just really quick, want to go over the different definitions of health disparities by these government agencies. So you have the International Institutes of Health, the NIH. They define health disparities as differences in access to or availability of facilities and services. In 2011, the United States Department of Health and Human Services defined health disparities as a particular type of health difference that is closely linked with social, economical, and or environmental disadvantage. They went further to define health disparities as adversely affecting groups of people who have systematically experienced greater obstacles to health based on their racial or ethnic group. In 2008, you had the World Health Organization defined health disparities as health inequities that are considered unnecessary, avoidable, and unfair or unjust. And what I would note is that only differences which systematically and negatively impact less advantaged groups are classified as disparities in most definitions. And so that is really key. what's key is acknowledging that health disparities adversely affect those groups of individuals um, who are impacted most. Those individuals that may be from poor neighborhoods, individuals who may be from minority, ethnic, and religious groups and cultural groups, the vulnerable population, women, children, the elderly. And so it's important to note that that systematically, that health disparities systematically affects those groups of individuals. So this is just looking at health disparities along the 4 or 5 subway line. And so what you can see from this, and I grew up in Brooklyn, so I grew up along that, the 4 or 5 line, starting with the first stop in Crown Heights, Utica Avenue. And so it shows you that residents in the poorest New York City neighborhoods, they experience health disparities and they die earlier than other New Yorkers. And so if you look at the percentages of premature death along the line, it's showing you that the first stop of the 4 or 5 train is Utica Avenue. 60% of individuals experience premature death. So you go up, now you're 14th Street, Union Square, that number is 43%. You're going up 42nd Street, Grand Central, 37%. Now you're going to 125th Street, and so you're near Harlem, and it spikes back up to 57%. Now you're going into the Bronx. You're going to 149th Street, Grand Concourse, 68%. And then you're all the way topped at 70% at East 108th Street on the 4-5 line. So it just really shows you that if you take a trip on the number 4 train, it shows the disparities in the percentage of people dying prematurely across New York City. This is the reality, guys. Unfortunately, this is a great representation of how we see health disparities are sort of defined, and you can look at them by traveling up and looking at the neighborhoods and seeing that those residents who are in those poorest neighborhoods, they do die early. So how can we eliminate health disparities? Well, it's really not that easy. There have been a lot of measures put in place to sort of look at health disparities and sort of work towards solutions to eliminate health disparities. And so when you look at the general perspective of health disparities or the field of health disparities, they have been primarily established to identify, decrease, and ultimately eliminate remediable disparities in health outcomes that reflect individual behaviors and systemic practices that are part of a sequence of events that may result in lower life expectancies and a greater burden of illness and disease among various subgroups. So, for example, the continuing impact of adverse experiences based on race, ethnicity transcends direct experiences with healthcare professionals. In my first year seminar course, I do provide a short video on the importance of cultural competency, but how individuals from different ethnic groups are, how they do experience adverse interactions with, healthcare providers based off of their race and their ethnicity. Some measures that have been put in place to sort of eliminate health disparities is Healthy People 2020. The goal of Healthy People 2020 is to assist individuals in attaining high quality, longer lives that are free of preventable disease, disability, injury, and premature death. The goal of Healthy People, one of the goals of Healthy People 2020 is to help individuals achieve health equity, to eliminate disparities and improve the health of all groups. Some of the initiatives that have been put in place with Healthy People 2020 is to create social and physical environments that promotes good health for all, and to also promote quality of life, healthy development, and healthy behaviors across all of the life stages. So I want to quickly just talk about systems of stratification. And so when you think about, or when you start to have a discussion about the impact of social stratification on health disparities, it starts with that definition of what is social stratification. So social stratification is a process by which a society is divided into layers, different layers, or what we call strata. And those layers are based on factors such as the level of education or occupation, a person's income, a person's wealth. So, for example, those individuals that are in the same social class, they tend to have the same types of jobs, similar levels of income. And so, as we explore the intersections of social stratification with gender, race, and ethnicity, you should understand that the basis for a caste or class society is through those subgroups, those specific subgroups of people that are based and grouped into those different categories. Stratification, as I talk about stratification with gender, race, and ethnicity, stratification does lead to different health outcomes for different groups of individuals within society. And so when you're looking at the systems of stratification or the systems of these different layers, societal mechanisms whereby people are positioned, they are positioned in a hierarchy. And that hierarchy, like it said, is based off of wealth and status and power, prestige, race and gender, ethnicity, and other identifiable characteristics. Systems of social stratification appear to be a natural phenomenon in the evolution of mankind. So when you think about communities, you're going to find pockets of communities that individuals have the same education, they have the same or very similar occupation, income, etc. Societal factors interact in such a way that health outcomes are disproportionately more likely to be reported as poor or fair among affected populations. You guys all saw the video, Social Policy in Concrete. And really it said in all essence in the intro is that your health or your health outcomes are really dependent on the zip code that you live in. And so that gives you a better perspective of the different systems of social stratification. When it comes to gender and social stratification, that intersection, disparities also occur based on sex, independent of gender identification. Because more power has been allocated to males historically, females are oftentimes included as a population that experiences health disparities. Research shows us that bilateral differentials exist between the two sexes that can lead to men also experiencing health disparities. And when you're looking at the outcomes, unequal outcomes that affect two sides in different ways. So you're going to see based off of, if you ever did the research, that unequal outcomes affect both sides in different ways. So while men experience health disparities, the way they experience health disparities will be different than how females do. Anthropological evidence reveals that the lifestyle and culture of early human beings or early humans was based on hunting and gathering. And so in those societies, in hunting and gathering societies, the smaller stature and weight of females in combination with the woman's role as a childbearer initiated or was the start of the patriarchy or male-dominant societies. And when we saw during those early days, the skills and competencies needed for survival of mankind are no longer patriarchal, but patriarchy still exists in many different areas. So looking at race and ethnicity with systems of social stratification, race is a social construct. It is a social construct that was developed to categorize people just as systems of social stratification. And it was based on the notion that some races are superior to others. Race is primarily based on physical characteristics, whereby if we're talking about ethnicity is based on social and cultural identities. So ethnocentrism is a term to define the tendency of people to view their own subgroup as superior and to reject the different subgroups. And these are subgroups that have different physical, cultural, behavioral, and or other characteristics. Um, the term in-group is defined as any group in which the individual identifies with. And so this identification is not necessarily based upon a person's race or ethnicity, gender, or culture, etc. Self-identification within a group oftentimes commands the loyalty of its members. And so that is considered the in-group and is not based off of what I mentioned, race, ethnicity, etc. The out group is defined as a group in which the individuals do not identify with the majority or the dominant group and is oftentimes accompanied by hostility towards that dominant group. So it's important for us to have an understanding of culture. What is culture? I always refer to the cultural iceberg. It's done by, a sociologist developed that cultural iceberg that just basically showed us that aspects of a person culture, there are some things that you can readily see, and there's a lot that a whole pool under this iceberg that you cannot see. And so in 1871, the E.B. Taylor, who is considered the founder of cultural anthropology, he provided a definition. And so when it comes to culture, culture is everything that makes us who we are. Everything. It can be our traditions, our beliefs, our customs, music, art, visuals. It can also mean those different things that we can't see, notions of time. It can be, how we handle personal, space, how we communicate, everything that makes us who we are. And so in 1871, E.B. Taylor defined culture as, or culture or civilization taken in its broadest sense, ethnographic. And so what he's saying is that this definition of culture is a very complex whole, which includes an individual's knowledge, belief, arts, morals, laws, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man that, man, woman, as part of a member of a particular society. And so it goes back to what I said, culture is everything that makes us who we are. Culture is learned. Culture is something that also changes over time, and it is passed on from generation to generation. Culture is very, very complex. The term dominant culture refers to the primary or predominant culture of a region, and it does not necessarily indicate that the dominant culture has some sort of superiority over other people outside of that culture. We have many subcultures that are dominant within American culture, and people, tend to simultaneously belong to numerous subcultures. You heard me mention before the intersectionality between social stratification, race, and ethnicity. And so by definition, intersectionality represents the interconnected nature of social categorization, such as race and class and gender, ethnicity, sexuality, as they apply to a given individual or they apply to a group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantage. And so I did my major research when I was working on my doctoral degree on it basically was not, I didn't use the terms intersectionality, but I looked at how Black women or Black females within academia, how they face challenges. And so the intersectionality of the disadvantage that Black women in academia face, and they're a very low percentage, less than 3%, but that their gender and their race, that intersectionality created this overlapping and independent system of discrimination for this group of population. So that just gives you an idea as to what I mean by intersectionality. So moving on to the terms cultural ethnocentrism and relativism. Cultural ethnocentrism is the belief in the superiority of one's own culture to another culture. So that person believes that his or her culture is superior to another one. And this oftentimes results from judging other cultures by a person's own cultural ideals. Oftentimes, when you think about ethnocentrism, it can lead to cultural biases or blind spots whereby that an individual has that can make an assumption about another person's behaviors based on their own norms, values, and beliefs. This can cause a huge problem in the healthcare field. If a professional believes that his or her way is the better way to treat or prevent a health problem, then the healthcare worker may disrespect or ignore the patient's cultural beliefs and values. With cultural relativism, this phrase was developed in the field of anthropology to refute the idea of cultural ethnocentricity. And so it is a principle of regarding and valuing the practices of a culture from the point of view of that culture in order to avoid making hasty judgments. And so cultural relativism really tries to counteract or counter ethnocentrism by promoting a different perspective that that one culture is no better and that all cultures are of equal value and they need to be studied from a neutral point of view. Cultural relativism also rejects value judgments on cultures and holds the belief that no culture is superior to another. Cultural relativism takes on an objective view of cultures, and it incorporates the idea that a society's moral code defines whether something is right or something is considered wrong for members of that society. So this particular cultural awareness questionnaire is part of your assignment that you will complete and it's due next week, and I'll go over that when I finish. It was adapted from Tara Good. She is from the Georgetown University Center of Child and Human Development, the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disability Education, Research, and Supervision. So for your homework assignment, this is the questions that are going to guide your reflection. So you can look at those in your sure. As I mentioned at the beginning of the class, cultural competency is an essential skill. So when talking about cultural competency, you probably will hear the terms linguistic competence and cultural and linguistic competence. And so I think they go hand in hand with developing a level of cultural competency. And so linguistic competence is providing readily available, culturally appropriate oral and written language services to limited English proficiency members or LEP members through such means. It can be bilingual or bicultural staff, trained medical interpreters, and qualified interpreters. Cultural and linguistic competence is the ability of healthcare providers and healthcare organizations to understand and respond effectively to a patient's cultural and linguistic needs. And so every encounter that they would have with the patient within the healthcare system, these providers and organizations they understand the importance of responding effectively. Cultural competence as a skill requires organizations and their personnel to first value diversity, inspect or assess themselves. It is also the requirement of organizations to manage the dynamics of differences that you may find in different cultural groups. It is also a requirement for organizations and personnel to acquire and institutionalize cultural knowledge and also adapt to diversity and the cultural context of individuals and the communities that they serve. I'll get into what cultural competency is and how the definition originated early on from Cross and his colleagues. But as I talked about culture and B.E. Tyler's definition of culture, having an understanding of what it is everything who we are, we said, but it also refers to integrated patterns of human behavior that includes language and thoughts and communications and actions and beliefs and customs and values and institutions of racial, ethnic, religious, or social groups. It's important that when we look at the parameters of health disparities, that you should have an understanding of the impact that culture and language may have on a person's experience with the healthcare provider or within the healthcare organization. And so the intersectionality of culture and language may influence health and healing and the wellness belief systems, such as what a patient or a person considers to be a health problem. Culture and language may also influence how illness and disease and their causes are perceived and how those symptoms and concerns about the problem are expressed. It will vary from culture to culture. Culture and language may influence how rights and protections are exercised. It may also influence how healthcare information is received and the patient's attitude towards healthcare providers and or treatment. And lastly, culture and language may influence the delivery of services by the provider who looks at the world through his or her own limited set of values, which can unfortunately compromise access for patients from different cultures. By definition, and there's really no one definition of cultural competence, many definitions of cultural competence have evolved from different diverse perspectives, interests, and needs, and have been incorporated actually into federal legislation. The original definition comes from the seminal work of Terry Cross, Barbara Banzran, Paul Dennis, and Marisa Isaacs in 1989. And so they provided a definition of cultural competence that really serves as the foundation of how we apply cultural competency in different professions. And they define cultural competency as a set of values, a set of behaviors, attitudes, and practices that takes place within a system, an organization, a program, or among individuals that enables them to work effectively across cultures. And so really quick, I want to go over how cultural competence, so that definition that talks about how organizations and programs and individuals, how they will make an effort to sort of look at their values and their behaviors and their attitudes and their practices that would allow them to work effectively across cultures. And so the American College of Health Association standards for, I believe it's not cultural competency, but I believe that is for health education, health promotion. They have a position on cultural competency, and they believe that culturally competent individuals have beliefs and attitudes that demonstrate an awareness and sensitivity to personal cultural heritage. They believe that they hold a position, because I don't want to keep saying beliefs. They hold a position that beliefs and attitudes that demonstrate a respect for and value the different heritages are part of being culturally competent. They also hold a position that beliefs and attitudes that demonstrate an awareness of personal values and biases is so important to understand how the role of and the influence of biases and how they may affect an individual's perception of other values. Another position that they hold with respect to beliefs and attitudes, it should demonstrate comfort with differences that exist between personal culture and other cultures' values and beliefs. For health education specialists, it's important that their knowledge and experience demonstrates a good understanding of the power structure in society and how non-dominant groups are treated. It's really that acknowledgement of that, their knowledge and their experience to demonstrate specific efforts to acquire knowledge and information about particular groups that they're working with. So what I did as a practitioner for many years, I got to know the culture of the population I was serving. So I've worked in different organizations that had dominant populations, and so um, I made it my goal to understand and gather information and knowledge about that particular cultural group. Also, knowledge and experience um, should demonstrate the recognition of institutional barriers that oftentimes prevent members of underrepresented or underserved groups from using organizational and societal resources. And again, that can be in every different discipline. Um, and it's important that we understand that we do have a responsibility to have attitudes and beliefs that demonstrate openness for cultural competency, and that as practitioners, we have the knowledge and experience through our education and through maybe our clinical field work, internships, that we're able to have that recognition, make those special efforts, and have a greater understanding of those power structures and how culture and linguistic competency and the lack thereof can definitely have an impact on health outcomes for individuals from different cultures. This comes from the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Minority Health. And so what they have done was they have made an effort in practicing cultural competency by honoring and respecting the beliefs, language, interpersonal styles, family arrangements, and behaviors of children receiving medical care. All of this also applies to the staff who are providing such care. This sort of practice is a dynamic, ongoing developmental process that requires long-term commitment, and it is achieved over time. So when I mentioned, I always mention in my first year seminar class, I'm not sure if I mentioned in this class, but one of my research interests is cultural competency, cultural humility among healthcare practitioners, particularly recreational therapists. And the first thing that I start with is that you're not going to become culturally competent overnight. It is something that is dynamic, it's not static, it's always constantly evolving and moving. And it is this ongoing developmental process. It requires long-term commitment. It is achieved over time. It starts with us. And so cultural competency being an essential skill of healthcare providers is one of the main ingredients in closing the health disparities gap. You're just transforming your role as that healthcare provider that's providing treatment and services to the role of an advocate. And it's so important that we step into that role. I think I may just show that video really quick that I keep referring to. And so it's very important that healthcare services that we provide are respectful of and responsive to the health police practices and cultural and linguistic needs of our diverse patient population. And if we are respectful of those things, then that can bring about positive health outcomes. And again, that's one of the main ingredients in closing that health disparities gap. So cultural differences affect nearly every aspect of a person's lives, including the way that families and individuals make decisions about healthcare. All cultures and all subcultures have developed systems of beliefs to sort of explain the cause of particular illnesses and how illnesses can and should be treated or cured, and who should be involved in the healthcare process. In addition, every culture and subculture, they do have their own beliefs about health and disease and treatment and healthcare providers. And so it's important to understand that culture influences healthcare at all levels, and you can see this through this particular model. And so the potential cross-cultural differences will lie in family involvement in gender roles, beliefs about the system origins, religious beliefs, tradition, pain expression and management, end-of-life decision-making, expectations of health professionals, diets and foods, and the approaches of Western medicine. According to the American College Health Association Standards for Health Education and Promotion, um, they, on the side of education, so preparing, a um, part of the part of the standards that they have for educational curricula is on cultural competency, and this what came about in 2011, and so they um, they have a requirement that colleges that have public health, community health, health education, health promotion programs, that they are preparing their students for when they go into the workforce, and that they have the position that culturally competent individuals have one, skills that demonstrates the ability to send and receive verbal and nonverbal messages accurately and appropriately. They also have take the position that culturally competent individuals have skills that demonstrate the ability to intervene appropriately, and as I said, advocate on behalf of individuals from different cultures. When we are in the role of an advocate, we are serving as an ally. They also have standards that colleges and universities should promote a diverse and inclusive campus through taking an assessment of the campus climate with regard to multicultural inclusion and sensitivity. They also take the position that colleges and universities should promote college health throughout the campus by one, creating opportunities for members of historically underrepresented, underserved groups to interact and engage with campus health professionals, and that colleges and universities should promote college health throughout the campus by infusing issues of power and social justice into health-related curriculum and co-curricula that can be through student groups, student workshops, etc. So, as I mentioned, Cross and colleagues, they came up with a definition of cultural competency. And so they developed a framework, right? A framework that identifies the processes of achieving cultural competency along a continuum. And this continuum has 6 different stages. So I tell my students when I talking about cultural competency, think about a rainbow, which is the spectrum. And you think about the left side of the spectrum represents the least favorable level that you want to be at. And the right end of the spectrum is the most favorable level that you want to be at. And so the goal of going through these different levels is to sort of see where you fall in terms of your level of cultural competency and how you can take the necessary steps to move towards the favorable level of cultural competency. And so the first level on the left side of the spectrum, the least favorable place you want to be, is cultural destructiveness. And cultural destructiveness includes attitudes, policies, and practices that are destructive to cultures and consequently to the individuals within that culture. An example of that is this picture here that we see on the Stolen Generations, Australia. And so up until the 1960s, Aboriginal children in Australia were taken from their parents to be educated in Western schools and never returned home. And so that is a good representation of cultural destructiveness. A system which adheres to this extreme assumes that one race is superior. They should eradicate the lesser cultures because of their perceived subhuman position. The next level on the spectrum of cultural competency is cultural incapacity. And so these are individuals or organizations or groups that lack the capacity to help minority clients or communities, remaining extremely biased. Some of the characteristics of cultural incapacity include discriminatory hiring practices, subtle messages to people of color that they're not valued or welcomed, and generally lower expectation of minority clients. And so in my community, I'm very involved in the education. And I remember attending a meeting where there were I would say maybe 10 to 15 family members that wanted to pull their children. Well, the children weren't even in the school yet, but they wanted to receive um, a waiver to have their children go to a different school um, because the parents, for whatever reason, kept saying that those kids, those people, uh, those grades, the programs that you have for these people. And so it was very evident, at that time that um, some of the language that was used in that meeting was discriminatory. And so these were the subtle messages without saying that I don't want my child to be educated with Black and brown children. Again, that was an example of cultural incapacity. The next level is cultural blindness. I think that this is where a lot of people fall, and they think that this is like a safe place. And so cultural blindness refers to the provision of services with the express philosophy of being unbiased, functioning with the belief that all people are equal and all people are the same. And we know that people are not the same. We like to say that we're all human and we all bleed the same, but when it really comes to treatments and with the provision of services towards underrepresented, underserved groups, their treatment and their access to treatment is not the same, and so we shouldn't provide the same type of treatment and services that we will provide for another group. Cultural blindness is characterized by the erroneous belief that approaches used by the dominant culture are universally applicable, resulting in ethnocentric services that ignores cultural strengths, encourages assimilation, and blames the victim. And so, again, a very comfortable area where people feel that everyone is the same and they should have the same type of services. When you have to be very individualized when it comes to groups of individuals. This is why we have the health disparities. I showed you the map of health disparities along the 4 or 5 line. The next level is cultural pre-competence. And so this is the recognition of weaknesses in serving. So this is the weakness either of organizations, programs, systems, individuals in serving minorities, and going the next step to make an attempt to improve services to a specific population. Under this level of cultural pre-competence, there is a desire to develop quality services and to make a commitment to civil rights, but with a lack of information on the function of culture and its impact on client populations and how to proceed. So this is like the first step, right? So they're recognizing it. They need some sort of assistance with moving forward. How are we going to move forward with providing access to services, providing access to training, providing, information, but they are admitting that they have a desire to provide quality services and make a commitment to those underserved, underrepresented populations, but they really just don't know where to start. The next step is cultural competence, and this is where you'll find individuals, organizations, programs have an acceptance and respect for difference. With this particular level, there should be some ongoing, continuous self-assessment regarding culture, and careful attention needs to be paid to dynamics of difference with a continuous expansion of cultural knowledge and resources and a variety of adaptations to service models in order to better meet the needs of minority populations. So there are a lot of research out there. There are a lot of service models that can assist programs, organizations, systems, individuals on how to better meet the needs of minority populations, because all the need is not monolithic, right? So all the needs are going to be different. And the last step schedule is cultural proficiency. I like this continuum because it is a continuous, ongoing self-assessment of one's values, one's personal values, organizational values, mission, goals, visions, programs, systems, looking at their values and beliefs and their biases, and to continuously expand their knowledge. And so with cultural proficiency, these individuals, programs, organizations are holding culture in high esteem, always seeking to increase knowledge of culturally competent practice. And that can be a series of trainings, workshops, how you engage minority populations. And I like this continuum of respect, communicate, understand, engage. It is something that's continuous. As I mentioned, cultural competency is a spectrum, but it is a continuum. It has those different levels. Looking at where you fall, as I mentioned, it is an ongoing process. You just don't arrive at being culturally competent. Cross and their colleagues also provided a cultural competency continuum that has the different stages and where an individual or a program organization should be. So in the areas of competency, when it comes to knowledge of patients, step one, if you're culturally unaware, then you don't notice the cultural differences in patients, their needs, their attitude. And so moving all the way to step five, where cultural versatile, that is where an organization, a program or individual pursue understanding of patient culture. They make an attempt to learn from other cultures. And so the different areas of competency is knowledge of patients, attitude towards diversity, practice-related behaviors, and practice perspective. And so the goal is to look at this continuum for organizations, programs, systems, and individuals. And pretty much when it comes to providing healthcare services, look at which stage you are in and how you can just sort of move along this continuum. As I mentioned, culture is everything that we are, but culture is also everywhere in healthcare. When you look at the healthcare encounter, starting with the culture of biomedicine, the provider's culture, the patient's culture, if you're addressing the linguistic needs of individuals, then the individual's culture, the culture of the healthcare institution, all of these things come into play. And because each individual brings with them their own cultural background, there are many cultures at work every time a person interfaces with the healthcare system. Every healthcare visit, you're having all of these things go into play. You're taking into consideration the provider's culture, the culture of biomedicine first, the provider's culture, patients, interpreter, the institution's culture. And so it's important that we understand these things are in play. And so next I'm going to talk about reasons to increase cultural competency, because we need to, right? Cultural competency and having culturally competent individuals, organizations, programs benefits the consumers, benefits the patients. It also benefits the stakeholders and communities in support of positive health outcomes. It also serves as a foundational pillar for reducing disparities through culturally sensitive and unbiased quality care. So we talked about that having a skill set or an essential skill of being cultural competent is one of the main ingredients in closing that disparities gap. Another reason to increase cultural competency is because the perception of illnesses and diseases and how diseases are caused, they vary from culture to culture. And it is important that, we understand that there are going to be various belief systems regarding healing and wellness that will vary from culture to culture. Culture and socioeconomic concerns also influence health-seeking behaviors and attitudes towards healthcare providers and services. And so I did, I want to say it was in 2021, right? 2021, around April, one of the colleges, Temple University, had an evidence-based practice 2-day workshop or, 2-day conference where researchers and scholars shared information, best practices on a variety of different topics, right, regarding evidence-based practice. And so what I did was I presented on cultural competency, and I also spoke about the intersections at that time with Black Lives Matter and COVID-19 and how all of these things come into play when it talks about COVID-related deaths and those high numbers as we saw in the beginning of the pandemic. and vaccine hesitancy. And so I went in and I said that, it's important that healthcare providers are culturally competent, that they understand the dynamics of different cultures and how a culture and race and socioeconomic background does influence how certain individuals from different cultures interact with healthcare providers and services. And so they should have an awareness of that. You should have an awareness of the background to that. We talked about the Nuremberg trials here. We talked about Tuskegee experiment, and those things that happened many, many years ago have an impact on individuals from different cultural groups. Another reason to increase cultural competency is because individual preferences does affect traditional and non-traditional approaches to healthcare. Patients also benefit from overcoming their personal biases about healthcare systems and services, and that was the end result of my presentation, was that we have to sort of help the clients through advocacy, through education, through just basic hearing out, them sharing their feelings on how to really overcome these personal biases and to understand and reconcile that these horrific things happen. However, we have to present to them the science. We have to present to them why it is important. And it starts with developing a relationship and building a relationship, a trusting relationship that patients know that you as a healthcare provider, you are responsive to their beliefs and cultural and linguistic, needs. It's important. Healthcare providers from culturally and linguistically diverse groups are underrepresented in the current delivery system. So, when you think about the low number of doctors from different racial groups, healthcare providers, who are diverse, they are underrepresented as well. And lastly, another reason and the most important reason to increase cultural competency in programs, organizations, institutions, individuals, systems, is that it can reduce costs. So if you talk about, I just said cultural competency is the gap in closing health disparities, then we would see more positive health outcomes that will definitely see a reduction in the cost of service delivery. It is what it is. People will adopt these healthy behaviors. People will trust what their healthcare provider is telling them. They're respectful of and responsive to their needs, and we will see a dramatic reduction in healthcare costs. In 2013, the United States Department of Health and Human Services Office of Minority Health developed the National Cultural and Linguistically Appropriate Services, which are known as CLAS. And there are, I believe, 10 standards, I want to say, but there are several themes. And so these standards were intended and developed to advance health equity, to improve quality, and help to eliminate healthcare disparities by establishing a blueprint for individuals and healthcare organizations to implement culturally and linguistically appropriate services. The ultimate goal was that if these organizations and individuals adopt these standards, then it will help to advance better health and better healthcare in the United States. The CLAS standards also looks at how individuals can tailor services to an individual's culture and language preferences, and that if the health professionals do that by, making it individualized, tailored services, then the health professionals can play a very active and important role in bringing about positive health outcomes for diverse populations. The mission and goal of the Office of Minority Health is the pursuit of health equity must remain at the forefront of our efforts. We must always remember that dignity and quality of care are rights of all and not the privilege of a few. The Office of Minority Health has also launched an online resource center for these CLAS standards. So class has some recommended standards. They have the principal standard that they have is to provide effective, equitable, understandable, and respectful quality care and services that are responsive to diverse cultural health beliefs and practices, preferred languages, health literacy, and other communication needs. And then they have different themes. And so the themes within the class standards fall under governance, leadership, and workforce. And so they do have three standards. I think it's like 14 to 15 standards. They have three standards that fall under that theme of governance, leadership, and workforce. And it provides guidance on developing leadership capacity in healthcare organizations for promoting and sustaining the class standards. Under the theme of communication and language assistance, there are four standards that provides recommendations to healthcare organizations for addressing language and other communication barriers to adequately meet the needs of people with limited English proficiency. And under the third theme, engagement, continuous improvement, and accountability, they have 7 standards that provides a blueprint for establishing community engagement, and it also includes recommendations on how to conduct community assessments. And so if you have a chance, you should, you can type class in the search bar, and you can see these different standards and the different themes within those standards. Alrighty, that is it, guys. So this is our your review terms for class number 10. You know, that is always due the following week. So class 10 reviews are going to be due on the 26th. So your next assignment, which is the cultural awareness questionnaire reflection, it is 1 page, double space. Again, guys, I put many messages in Blackboard about the requirements for papers, and so 1 page, double space, 250, 300 words. You guys know by now I do count the words, because if you don't meet that number, I do tell you that you're short. And so you want to give the questionnaire. The questionnaire is also in Blackboard, but if you refer to these, the previous slides, you're going to administer the questionnaire to yourself or another person. You're going to give consent. Please make sure that you're not using a person's real name when you are giving them the questionnaire. Then you're going to ask 2 questions. You're going to answer rather 2 questions. What did you learn about yourself doing this activity? And the second question, what has been your experience with others' cultural competency when providing healthcare to you? And again, if you administer this to yourself, protect your own anonymity and write up the responses in third person said. So I won't know whether you gave the questionnaire to yourself or to another person. Let me just quickly go to, stop this. I did not put my Blackboard up. Alrighty, guys, so this is the questionnaire. It's in a PDF. Again, this is 1 page, double space. You're going to give the questionnaire, but you're answering the 2 questions. I don't need you to, and let me just open the PDF. I don't need you to cut and paste any of this. You're just going to either give it to yourself or to another person. And it's 14 questions. You're 14 questions on the questionnaire. The 14 questions will not be and should not be in your paper. You are given the questionnaire to yourself or another person, and you are asking two questions. What did you learn about yourself doing this activity? If you are administering this to someone else, you're going to ask them, what did you learn about yourself doing this activity? And the second question, what has been your experience with others? And that should be apostrophe after that, as I'll put that in there. Cultural competency when providing healthcare to you. So if you're answering the question, if you administered the questionnaire to yourself, you're asking yourself these two questions. If you administer the questionnaire to another person, you are asking them those two questions. Is that clear? Because I just want to be very clear that I don't need to see anything regarding the questionnaire in your paper. It is not to be in bullet form. It is to be in narrative form. Please take yourself with you and share if you have. Thank you, Galligan. And share if you have any questions. Okay. Let me now get out of this because I do want to show you that video, like I said, just really quick, because I think it's very impactful just to have an understanding of what people encounter every day. And I sort of made the connection with the video also that providers who are not respective and responsive to the beliefs of patients oftentimes label those patients as being non-compliant. They also label those patients as being problematic. And so it's very important that, as I mentioned, as a healthcare provider, our role is to be advocates. So let me just get to. Just gotta go to my Blackboard page, and I just think it's very impactful. So this video is entitled, it's a cultural health case study. It is entitled Cultural and Religious Beliefs. Let me just. So if you go to Think Cultural Health, you can also see the class standards here.
Hello there. I'm Dr. Calais. I'm filling in for Dr. Smith. Looks like you had a very successful surgery last month. How's your recovery been?
Well, thank you.
I'd like to begin by doing a quick examination of the location of your surgical wound just to make sure you're healing correctly and everything looks healthy. May I ask you to remove your head covering?
No, I cannot remove my hijab.
Nadira, I want to make sure that you're healing from your surgery correctly, and in order to do that, I need to take a look. Did Dr. Smith not tell you this would be part of the follow-up?
Well, Dr. Smith is a woman, and you are a man. And I cannot remove my hijab in the presence of a man who is not my husband. But that is why I came here, to see Dr. Smith. She can be the only one to do my examination. If Dr. Smith cannot be here today, I will have to reschedule my appointment.
All right. Why don't you wait here a moment, and I will check and see if she's on her way. Elizabeth, I'm glad you're here. This patient of yours is giving me a heck of a lot of trouble. I'm trying to examine the sutures from her surgery, and she won't remove her hijab. How am I supposed to do a post-op checkup with her?
Nadira, I'm sorry. Well, I understand, Michael. It's part of her cultural and religious beliefs that a woman may only remove her hijab in front of her husband. Even if we don't fully understand it, we need to respect those beliefs when treating patients. Well, I better go check on this. I'm sorry. What room is she in?
3B?
Thanks. If you want to catch up later and talk more about this, we can do so.
That'd be great. I'll catch you at lunch. Bye.
Alrighty. Here. So as you can see, Dr. Callahan he shared, right? He very sarcastic to Miss Ansari, asking her to remove her head covering. So very, very sarcastic. And I just want to note also that she had surgery. She was evaluated by Dr. Smith, but then she went back to the doctor, and it was Dr. Callahan. So this is just an example of how complicated primary care can be, and that if you find doctors and groups of doctors that are part of a network umbrella of a larger organization, the chances are that as the patient, she's not guaranteed to see Dr. Smith all the time. And so, as I mentioned, when he said, I'll check to see if she's on her way, he referred to the patient as giving him a heck of a lot of trouble. And again, while we see that he was not respectful to her cultural and religious beliefs, but then he labeled her as being difficult. He labeled her as being non-compliant because he wanted to violate her cultural and religious beliefs. And, as the Dr. Smith said, we may not understand it, but we have to be respectful of their beliefs. And that is the role of the advocate, because now she is going to, stand up for her patients. And she could have said, yeah, she gives trouble, or, yeah, I'm a woman, but she could have handled it so many different ways. However, she took that role as an advocate to say that I'm culturally competent and it's an ongoing process, but I'm going to share with you some information. I'm going to provide you with some education. And so that is oftentimes the role of an advocate. So I like that short video. It is very impactful. I can just go for days talking about just the different things that we saw in that particular video. So I'm going to now take attendance. Give me 1 second, guys. Alrighty, so when I call your name, you could just take yourself off mute.